Hello, Algebra 2. This topic is just a review solving by factoring when it comes to quadratic equations. Remember there's 5 ways that we can solve for quadratic equations. You can solve by graphing, you can solve using the quadratic formula, you can solve by factoring, you can solve by graphing in the calculator, and then also by completing the square. And solving by factoring with a quadratic equation is one of the fastest ways, if it's factorable, obviously. So I want to review that with you. Solving by factoring for number 1, this is our equation. And if we were going to solve using the calculator, we would plug in the y equals x squared minus 2x minus 8. And we would see that our solutions, remember we're solving for, are the solutions, which are the x-intercepts or zeros or roots. Those words are used interchangeably when they're real. So it turns out we already know, and we're just going to confirm that by factoring, but our two values that we know that are we're going to be finding, we should be getting that x equals 4 and x equals negative 2 for our two values when we solve by factoring. So remember, when you're solving by factoring, when you have a trinomial, we're gonna, and our a is not equal to any number other than 1. So when a is 1, remember we're doing reverse FOIL here. We're using logic to factor. And our first terms for FOIL, if we're going to FOIL these out to equal that, we're going to see what x squared. The only options would be x times x for our two first that would multiply to x squared. And then we want to look at our combinations for the last item. So our last items has to multiply to negative 8 and add up to negative 2. So a couple different options for negative 8. We could have negative 4 times 2. We could have 4 times negative 2. And we could have 8 times negative 1 and negative 8 times 1. And we want to use one of these options that would end up adding up to negative 2, because we're talking about the outside and inside terms to add up. So in this case, the only one of these that would multiply and to negative 8 and add up to negative 2 would be our first one here. So this is the one we're going to use. So x minus 4 and x plus 2. And we always want to confirm that before we keep going. Make sure you FOIL it out, make sure you get the right answer. And yep, we FOILed that out and it is correct. Now our next step for solving by factoring is setting both factors equal to 0. So x minus 4 equals 0 and x plus 2 equals 0. So let's write these steps down as we're going. So our steps for solving by factoring, the first one is to factor. Our second step is to set each factor equal to 0. And then we're going to solve for x. And we are using the zero product property when it comes to setting each factor to 0. So if you think about this, y, we're going to set both equal to 0. This could be 0 for it all to equal 0, or this could be 0. So both factors are options here. That could be set equal to 0, or that could be set equal to 0. So now we solve for x, and we add 4 to both sides, and x is 4. And then we subtract 2 from both sides on this one, and x equals negative 2. So we have two solutions, just like we thought we would, and we confirmed what we saw graphically in our calculator. Okay, for example 2, we have a binomial this time, and we always want to look for the greatest common factor first. You can see that they both have a factor of 4 in them. So let's first factor out that 4. And so 4 times x squared would be equal to 4x squared. And then negative 4 times 4 is equal to negative 16. So that's our first step when we factor. Always look for the greatest common factor. And now with our options of two terms, we have all our special cases. We're thinking about all the patterns for special cases. So remember, for the special cases when we have two terms, our binomial that's left inside, it could be a difference of squares or a difference of cubes or a sum of cubes. And they all have to be perfect for you to keep factoring. Here we do see a perfect square and of both items, so it's going to be one of our difference of squares. So I'm going to write those three down here just to help you review that and then bring it back. Okay, so I just typed in our special cases for two terms. Remember these: the difference of squares, difference of cubes, or sum of cubes. And remember the pattern, the perfect cubes and perfect squares. In this case we have two perfect squares. So what we'll be doing is using this formula. And remember, when it comes to the difference of squares, the only way you couldn't have a middle term is if it was minus here. So you need the to subtract and add the same item. So we take the square root of x squared, so we have x, and then the square root of 4 would be 2, and that gets written in for both, and then it must be a minus and a plus for our inside terms and our outside terms to cancel. Okay, and now we're going to step 2, set each factor equal to 0 and solve for x. So our first factor, 4, cannot equal 0, so that's not going to be a factor. Now x minus 2 would be equal to 0, and that would be x equals 2. And our second one would be x plus 2 equals 0, and that would be x equals negative 2. So for number 2, we have two answers, positive 2 and negative 2. All right, for number 3, we now have a trinomial that they want us to solve by factoring. In this case, a is not equal to 1. So there's two ways to do this. One is through logic, like we did the first one, thinking about the factors. The second is through slide and divide. So I'm going to first talk through the logic, and then we'll do slide and divide. So number 3, so for the logic, again, we're factoring. We are setting, we want to find two things that will end up multiplying to 3x squared minus 7x plus 2. And when it's prime, I like, when our numbers here are prime, I like to use logic because that's a little bit faster than slide and divide. So the only way that 3x squared could be gotten to by our our first term times first term would be 3x times x. So we have 3x times x as our only options for 3x squared. So I start there. And now I'm going to look at my last terms. So we have to multiply to a positive 2. So we have 2 times 1 as an option, or the other thing that would multiply to a positive 2 would be negative 2 and negative 1. Now here we just can't look at how this is going to add up to negative 7. We have to take into account the 3. And we want it to add up to negative 7. So there's only 2 places of options, so you can guess and check. But if you think about using logic, the only way we're going to get to 7 is as this negative 2 gets multiplied by 3. So I'm going to need to put it here, negative 2, and then negative 1 here. So then we'll have negative 2 times 3 would be negative 6, and then plus a negative 1x would be negative 7x. So there's our two factors that set equal to 0. And we'll get 3x equals 1 and x equals 1/3 for this factor, this solution, and our second will be x equals 2. Okay, so that's using logic, and we found our answer. We can also use slide and divide. Let's go ahead and do the same problem using slide and divide. And I'm going to switch colors to green for the slide and divide. Will be the same problem, 3x squared minus 7x plus 2. And now we're just going to factor using slide and divide. So remember, slide and divide. The first step is slide. So we're multiplying that 3 times that 2. So it becomes x squared minus 7x plus 6. Now we have an easier trinomial to factor. That's why a lot of people like this method. So here we only have one option for x times x to equal x squared. And then for 6 here, it has to multiply to a positive 6 and add up to a negative 7. So the only options would be negative 3 and negative 2, because it has to add up to a negative 7, or negative 6 and negative 1 that we would multiply. So the only options here, this would add up to negative 5, and here would add up to negative 7. So we'd have to use the second option here. So negative 6 and negative 1. Now when we slide, we can't forget to divide, or this won't multiply. When you go to check it, it won't equal that. So now we divide both items by the original thing we slid, we multiplied by. So each item has to be divided by 3. And then we simplify our fractions if we can. The only one that can simplify is 6 divided by 3. X minus 1/3 is already simplified. And then if we're just factoring, we would slide this back. But now that we're solving, this is actually easier to leave in this position. And we just set both factors equal to 0. So x minus 2 equals 0 would be x equals 2. And x minus 1/3 equals 0 is x equals 1/3. And you can see we got the same answer for both problems. So that was a good review for factoring and solving by factoring.